Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, a show that brings you the latest insights, thought leadership and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's episode, I'm joined by Darryn Quayle, who's the Vice President of the Global Mining Sector Leader at Worley, someone with deep experience across government, engineering and sustainable mining development. Darryn has recently returned from an intense and insightful visit to Brazil as part of the Global Investor Commission on Mining 2030, where he and other industry leaders met with investors managing more than 130 trillion in assets alongside government representatives and even President Lula himself. In this conversation, we're going to unpack what happened during that visit, from the discussions in Brasilia and Belo Horizonte to the moving experience of revisiting the Brumadinho disaster site nearly 6 years on. We're going to explore how Worley and the wider mining community are working to align investor expectations, sustainability goals and real-world project delivery, shaping the partnership and principles that could define the future of responsible mining. Darryn's also going to be attending the upcoming Resourcing Tomorrow event, the premier gathering of the world's mining leaders, taking place in London from the 2nd to the 4th of December. There's going to be obviously C-suite executives from some of the biggest mining companies worldwide. There's going to be over 40 government ministers, leading mining technology providers, and many more mining professionals from the industry. Dig Deep, the mining podcast, is a proud partner with Resourcing Tomorrow, and with this, we can provide some discounts if you register through us, and all the details are in the show notes accompanying this podcast. So please take a look. Take advantage of this obviously great opportunity and hopefully see you there. Darryn, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. Bit jaded. I did the overnight flight from Sao Paulo a couple of days ago, arrived into Heathrow at 6, and the old brain is still a bit of a brain fog. So I hope I come through okay today on the call.
Yeah, and hopefully you'll stay awake for this podcast, yeah. And I'm sure our audience would be really excited to listen to obviously this podcast, especially your trip Brazil, which we're going to speak about. As we always start these podcasts off, I just wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, obviously about your career, how your career has sort of grown from possibly when you graduated, how you got into the mining industry, and if you can just run us through your career to the present day.
Sure. So I've been in the mining industry all my life, Rob. My dad worked for Caterpillar, the global earth moving company. So it's all I've ever known. I drove my first bulldozer when I was 6, and I've just been involved in it from Africa to Australia, New Zealand. I lived in England for nearly 20 years, but I've run Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and New Zealand, the Pacific businesses as well in the mining industry, which is a huge breadth of the world to be exposed to. I'm currently my previous role to this one in Worley was the government's mining engineer, and that gave me an additional perspective of mining from a governmental point of view, but also giving access to politicians and people who are very influential in the mining industry, but not necessarily knowledgeable about it. So my role was to bridge that gap, if you like, between the mining industry and politicians making fundamental decisions about our sector. And now, about 4.5 years ago, I think, I moved into Worley, a global EPCM and engineering company. We do project delivery with engineering behind it. Some notable projects: Oyu Tolgoi for Rio Tinto in Mongolia, the Woodsmith project in the northeast of England for those who are in the United Kingdom. So we're well known around the world, but and familiar with the mining industry over decades and decades. So the combination of my experience and Worley's capability is is really interesting at this point in time in terms of where Worley goes next and where the mining industry goes next, because it's not going to be the same as it's always have been.
Yeah. As I mentioned, you've obviously just come back from Brazil, but been reading Adam Matthews' regular updates, obviously on LinkedIn, and obviously pretty intense trip in Brasilia and Belo Horizonte. Can you just take us through the program of the week whilst you were there and what you got up to, and alongside obviously other members of the Mining 2013 Commission?
Yeah, sure. The Mining 2030 Commission, its birth was sadly after the Brumadinho disaster in 25th of January 2019. And its parent was the Investor Mining Tailing Safety Initiative, which I'm sure many people have heard of. And what happened was that was a result of the Church of England disinvesting from Vale, and that catching the attention of the FT. And and that news created a chatter amongst investors about what on earth they were investing in, because there was quite a lot of misunderstanding or lack of understanding of what the sector was. There wasn't too much knowledge, if I could be blunt, about what mining was, in addition to just being a vehicle for a return on an investment. So the Investor Mining Tailing Safety Initiative was birthed at Westminster Abbey Church House through the Church of England Pension Fund and a guy called Adam Matthews. And that led to the global tailing standard on less than probably about 18 months later, which was a big improvement in the global mining industry. And that's where the Investor Mining Tailing Safety Initiative sort of ended. That was its role. But what the investors realized, there were probably $18-20 trillion of assets under management in that room, in that initiative. They realized there was more work to do. They believed in mining as a powerful force for good that could really assist the development of better standards across the world, not just in mining, but in local communities, etc. So they set up this Mining 2030 Commission, and its aim is to continue the journey of the initiative, but with a much larger and broader scope. So that's what it was. That's what it was set up to do. So the program was to promote the report that we've just written. It's taken 2 years, and with Brazil being a very, very large center of effort for the mining industry globally, but also COP, the Global Climate Change Conference, the Conference of Parties in Belém this week and next week. It was a powerful opportunity to bring investors into the COP program, which I think is probably the first time it's done in mass like it has been this year. I think this is probably the first time mining's role in climate change has been addressed in such a powerful way. And President Lula was very keen to meet us. We had $130 trillion of assets in the room, assets under management in the room. So it's a very powerful investor task force that was clearly focused on mining. So that was really the brief to promote what we were trying to achieve. And Lula was trying to understand how he could assist and contribute to those aims and visions.
Obviously, we'll learn a little bit more about the trip later on in this podcast, but I suppose I'm really interested in the sheer size of the investor presence there. As you mentioned, there was 130 trillion of assets under management within the room. What is their interest in the Global Investor Commission on mining? And I suppose in particular, Dirty and Dusty joining you on this multi-day visit that you went on, and also obviously interested in what this could actually mean for the mining industry and as a sector over the coming years.
So it's a good question. Since Brumadinho, the understanding of the world's mining industry by some of the world's largest investors has been transformed. It's a very different place. When we did the Investor Tailing Safety Initiative, there was a lack of understanding what a tailings dam was. Some of the basic fundamentals wasn't there. That's no longer the case. So we've got better educated investors who understand better about mining, but also the thing that grips them is its incredible potential to be this force for good. Everyone needs mining. I mean, everything we're talking on today is some sort of derivative of the mining industry in the metals and minerals that it produces, but also its impact on the ability to bring prosperity to developing nations. That we've never fully unpacked that. And I think the investors are really interested in the global impact that mining can provide, that wide breadth of positivity and productivity and performance that it can bring the world if it's done right. So that's why they're interested in the mining industry. That's why so much investment under management was in the room. In so far as the mining sector and why they were getting dusty and dirty was furthering their knowledge of the mining industry. They wanted to get to see and feel some of the issues that mining had encountered in the last 10 years in particular the last 6. So that's really why they were there. They were also interested in what they could do to support the industry going forward. What was their role, and they're still trying to unpack that. They have some quite defined objectives, which I'll take you through in a little bit of time if you let me. But they really just consolidating their understanding and their direction and their place in this journey of the global sector. They're not a side of it. They now realize and regard themselves as an integral part of the mining sector. And they have a role to play. I think part of it is getting away from the short-term investors and getting more patient capital, that sort of thing. I think that was by far the biggest thrust and reason for them being in the room and getting dusty and dirty on some of these sites and understanding the mining industry better.
Obviously, not everyone gets to meet a president and cabinet of one of the obviously largest countries in the world, especially to actually discuss mining. I just wonder if you could just tell us how the meeting went with the president, what it was like, and what was discussed, and I suppose some of the key outcomes of you meeting the president and the cabinet.
Yeah, it was an incredible day. We met in their foreign office, which is an incredible building. And one of the things that was interesting was President Lula's approach to people. Highly personable person. Shook everyone's hand in the delegation and spent some time just getting to know us. It appeared in a very compressed schedule that a politician had that he had all the time in the world. So this was an important meeting for him. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that he also brought his cabinet in as well. Finance minister, mining minister, environmental, etc. So this was a very important meeting for him and his government to listen to the investors. So I get the sense that he is very much aware of Brazil's role in the mining industry, in the global mining industry. He wants to understand our perspective or the Commission's perspective better, so he can align and help work towards common good of the mining sector. And I get a real sense that he aims to lead some of these initiatives going forward. So we presented the outcomes of the report, which I can send you the link, Rob, and we can share it with the people that are listening. But there were 3 main outcomes that we talked about. The first was this Brazilian and regional task force on mining, and on how to connect the value chains together. This collaborative approach to upstream right through to downstream finished products in Brazil and Latin America. Brazil understands that they can't do it by themselves. But they can work with local and regional partners in Latin America to better build this upstream to downstream process. So I think that was the first thing, this regional task force. And the second was having a better understanding of what the demand for critical minerals and metals in particular was. We have a number of bodies around the world, but the granularity that one source of the truth was missing as well. So we talked about what we call the International Minerals Agency, this body that could be a vehicle for that. that type of information and policy and collaboration. So that was really interesting. And the third piece focused on the getting rid of some of these legacy issues that mining has had for sometimes thousands of years, but particularly in the last 150 as we've really put scale in. So some of these large tailings dams that are orphans and quite risky, standing in the headway of very large communities, and looking at a legacy fund to look at decharacterizing them, as they call it in Brazil, but effectively getting rid of them, but also addressing the propensity for conflict in the mining industry. That the formalization of artisanal and small scale miners. How does that work? How do we reduce the conflict that sometimes comes with the mining industry, and particularly at large scale? So those were the three outcomes, and we left with sort of an approach to build on those three platforms and to work together into delivering them. So we're really glad, actually, and quite surprised when President Lula made a presidential decree on the Brazilian and regional task force, that approach to starting to look at that. So he announced that Wednesday this week, so a couple of days ago. So that was really active, and what we see is that Brazil itself will lean into this International Minerals Agency, but I get the sense that you'll see South Africa, with President Ramaphosa and President Lula starting to work together on the peace building. And it's really interesting that the mining jurisdictions of South Africa and Brazil are actually already quite connected. And we'll see some sort of activities, joint activities between them as they seek to address some of the fundamental issues of mining and make mining a better place for investment, which is exactly his focus of why he was talking to us in the room on Thursday last week.
I could imagine most of obviously the intense part of your visit must have been obviously visiting the site of the Brumadinho obviously disaster, and I do recall you had a role in the rescue efforts whilst your role as the British government's mining engineer at that particular time. What was it like returning to that site after nearly 6 years and hearing obviously from some of the relatives of the 272 that died? What did you learn from your visit, and how did it change your view of the mining industry?
Yeah, it was a very difficult experience, actually. What is not really known in too large a detail is that the British government had quite an influential role in playing in the rescue efforts, thanks to the satellite applications catapult, which is a government department has some of the best experts in the world in satellite imagery and data processing. And on the day of the disaster, or soon after, the Prime Minister at the time, the British Prime Minister Theresa May, commissioned my team and the satellite applications, and her words were to render Brazil any assistance that she required. And as a result of that initiative, or what do you want to call it, she allowed us to really lean into this. And we had teams in helicopters 2 days later in Brazil. And our role was not to help pull people out of the mud and the rock, but to help the emergency services better understand what on earth had happened. Where were the tailings flows? What was it before and what was it now? And trying to understand, in particular, where the cafe had gone, where that restaurant had gone. And the reason for that was, of the 272 people or 272 lives that were lost that day, 250 of them were workers, and they were mostly in the cafe having lunch. It happened at 12:28 in the afternoon. And the philosophy, or the thinking was at the time, that the tailings dam had, when it let go, it pushed that cafe intact. And maybe it was deep under the mud somewhere, and there were people still alive that we could recover. So our initial role was to ground truth that satellite imagery with the emergency services and try to understand where on earth that cafe had gone, and if we could recover any people from it that were alive. So that was the really interesting bit, because the Earth, the British take a picture of the Earth's surface every 4 days. We've done that since 1977. So we have a vast repository of information of the Earth that we can go back in time and see. And we're working with the emergency services trying to see how it had worked. And we'd seen 20, 30, 40 meters of tailings sometimes deposited in certain areas. So it was essential for the emergency services to really see that information and have that understanding of the scale and where the tailings had moved and where it could have moved critical infrastructure to. So that was the British government's role. So returning to the site after 6 years was a very surreal experience, particularly for me, because I knew that site back to front. That particularly up to the latter stages of the geography of the area, but I'd never actually been there. I'd only ever seen it from space. We pored over those images. We tasked the satellite to provide as many images as it could as it kept coming over in the orbit. But I'd never been to the site, but I knew it, and so that was a crazy experience, actually being and smelling and feeling and touching the place. Rather than just seeing it from an image, a high resolution image, and talking to the emergency services about it. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was being able to ask the questions about what had happened. When there was such little information about what was actually going on. But with the benefit of 6 years of work, they were the team from Worley and others and the relatives were able to explain in more detail what actually had happened. And one of the closure for me was we were trying to find that cafe desperately. But the reality was it got hit with a wall of rock at 113 kilometers an hour, and it obliterated it. There was nothing left. There was no one to save. And that was really an emotional experience. But what we were able to do was to also, so there was closure there for all of us, which was a big part. But it was also terrifying, harrowing when you look at, they've been really diligent in the rescue efforts, Rob. They've recorded with a precise accuracy of GPS satellite surveying. This was a whole body that was found. This was a part of a body. So we were able to see where the cafe was, and then it's terrifying. And I'm sorry for if this upsets people, but you just saw a plume of body parts as that rock hit the cafe and just tore people to bits. And it reinforced that, that terrible destructive potential of the mining industry if we get things wrong. And surely this was mining at its worst. It does not get any worse than this. And so, there was this closure aspect of it. It was this understanding of what had happened, but also it reinforced that, in God's name, we never can allow this to ever happen again. And that terrible learning of that disaster and what went wrong and what we need to do globally as an industry to make sure it never happens again. So that was that bit. And then talking to the relatives of the victims, we spoke to a father that lost his daughter and his son-in-law, and he's raising his grandchildren, without the benefit of being, of the mother and the father being in the room. So he's raising two children. We met the sister of Lolita, and heard from her, and terrifying things like, they only found we also talked to another sister, and they only found 7 centimeters of her sister. And in Brazilian law, you need to have 60% of a body in order to bury the person. And because you've only got 7 centimeters, you can't actually have a burial. So there's no closure. So they had to change the law. So you just saw, you can tell it was absolutely harrowing at sometimes when you understand it's not just a tailings dam failure. It's not just people killed. And I say that so carefully, but it's also the effect on the relatives, because the law doesn't necessarily understand about what damage these things can do. And also, there were 2 unborn children as well. And one of the biggest things that they had to face was, it was 270 people, but one of the biggest breakthroughs was putting those 2 unborn children who had every right to life in amongst the victims as well. So 270 became 272, and it was just listening to that, so it was profound. It was really interesting, and then not really interesting in the sense, not because of being interesting, but because you could really see how much we had to change. And you could really see the Global Investor Commission's role in that tailing standard, making sure it continues. The other thing that was really profound of the victims' relatives was they understood mining's role in Brazil. They weren't against it as an industry. They just didn't want their relatives to die in vain. And that was one of the comments that really struck us. We thought they'd be completely anti-mining, but they were hugely supportive of mining in of itself, but they were absolutely adamant that it had to change. And the way that, some of these legacy issues of processes that haven't fundamentally changed in 150 years, we really needed to lean in and innovate. We really needed to get better at what we do. It's no longer acceptable that we're still using fundamental processes that haven't changed in 150 years. We've made them bigger and better and more efficient, but it's still the same mining industry of 150 years ago in a sense. So that was some of it. I mean, it's a long answer to your question, but we were deeply shaken, but also inspired. Is that the right word? To make mining better, to provide a role in that change of the mining industry going forward. So yeah, that's pretty much it on how it went.
Yeah. And as you can see, just even answering that question and just reliving your experience, obviously it is emotional. Just speaking about it 6 years on. How do the families, obviously they won't ever get over it, but how have they come to terms with what happened 6 years on? Obviously there's probably certain regrets. How do you feel that they've now got on with their lives moving forward?
The father that lost his daughter and son-in-law, he's waiting to die. That's what he told us. He's raising his children, his grandchildren, but I've never seen such a broken man in my life. It was really, really profound. So some people haven't survived in terms of the relatives are dead inside. And I don't know if people like that can ever recover, Rob. I think it's devastated him as a person. The sisters and the brothers that we talk to, some of them have a different perspective. They want to use their relatives as a marker that they don't die in vain, that their deaths have caused a fundamental change in mining. So they are very much interventionist, and not in an aggressive way, but they're not going to allow their relatives to have died in vain. So they're an active part of the process. And, we met with Worley as well over an entire day on Saturday. And we went to Brumadinho. We actually saw, we went to the memorial on the Thursday with the relatives, which is a beautiful memorial that's really poignant, actually. It's on the site where the bodies were stored and the pieces of the bodies, and there's 172 boxes in this one room that's as part of the memorial, and that's where the, as the rescue services to this day find pieces of a human being. They are initially placed there in a numbered box that's not named, but number 72 in a list is a person's name. So there's 272 boxes. So that's why the memorial's there, because that's where all the bodies were brought. And that's in the lee of the Brumadinho disaster. If you stand at the memorial, you can see the B1 dam, which let go. But Vale took us through their monitoring systems, which are 24/7 with multiple people, and they're monitoring every single dam visually with infometrics, synthetic aperture radar. They're doing laser, they're doing microwaves, they're doing everything, and it's monitored 24/7. These people there at the MAC Center in Nova Lima, 24/7. So that's the tactical response to it. The other thing is that the company's response as well. We met with the Vale team, including Gustavo Pimenta, who's the chief exec. The Vale of today is nothing like the Vale of yesterday. It's not perfect, but this is a fundamentally different organization that is deeply committed to being a leader in safety and sustainability. It's a journey, but you can really, really see the steel in the people. You see, the thing is that the culture change of Vale came from within, because Vale is a huge organization in Belo Horizonte, and particularly Brumadinho, in terms of the whole Minas Gerais area. But the workers lost their relatives, right? When we were there on site, there was panic and chaos, because the management had brothers and sisters and mums and dads who were in that area, and they didn't know if they were alive. So it's a unique experience where such a scale of disaster meant that the employees themselves have this imperative to make sure that that never happens again. So Vale is a very close community of people now. The hierarchy has largely disappeared. They have a minister for a vice president of bad news. I call it that, where any risk that anyone feels, they have a single person who reports to the chief executive. They're able to address it instantly. So it's a very different organization, and so you could see that coming through as well. There's this wholesale change of an organization that's driven by its employees, with the titular head as the chief executive. And I say that very carefully about Gustavo, but his employees have a huge role to play in his organization going forward as well. And I think that the victims realize that fundamental change has occurred, and that that the Vale, model of operating is different, and they have the ability to talk to Vale. They're still incredibly upset, and there's that whole curve of some people never talk to Vale, other people realize that they can be used as a force for mining to fundamentally alter, not just in itself, but to the global mining industry. So yeah, that was some of it. Probably a long rambling answer, but it's difficult to capture in words what actually happened there and see it.
Yeah. If we look at investor accountability, obviously families express concerns, and you've mentioned it as well, about short-term profits versus long-term sustainability. How does Worley work with investors and obviously clients to align project delivery with responsible investment principles?
Yeah, it's not necessarily our role, right? But it's one of the things, and probably our competitors are the same, is we're a link. You've got an investor and a mining company and the finance, and we build the stuff, right? And we operate it to some degree in some aspects. Worley, when we have a role in teaching people about what we do, and some of the challenges of it. So I think, my role, I have a role in the commission, that I'm one of the commissioners, and my role is to represent that engineering aspect of the commission, and answer questions about how things work and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that we have to do things better. So that it's about teaching, It's about connecting. It's about reinforcing that, we, from Worley's point of view, we're active in first of a kind technology. When and trying to drive some of this this technology innovation. There's technologies out there, Rob, that can fundamentally change mining. But they, when you're putting, let me give you a perspective of an investor. When you're putting 5 or 6 billion into a project over 6 or 7 years to develop it, sometimes longer, you don't want any fundamental risks that you can't control. So, we've had this discussion on many times. You want the most tried and proven technology to be used, right? Because if you start putting in new fundamental parts of new technology, it does change the risk profile of that 6 billion pound program. That it's a long-term investment, right? So what we're trying to do is break that in a sense, or to improve it. How do we commercialize first of our kind technologies, getting rid of smelters, for example? Can we get rid of that through technologies like deep eutectics or so forth, or novel leaching technologies, so forth, which we stop the emissions of, well, we take a whole chunk of the process out, and also we reduce the environmental impact of it. And also, you don't produce tailings dams if you do in situ leaching, but there's a whole lot of issues with respect to that. So how, mining's role and mining's engineering is what Worley does, in terms of that. So we're really working with the investors on that and breaking some of the fundamental paradigms. This paradigm shift, we're trying to take them through that journey and make mining's impact on the environment far less. So that's what we do. We're also we're also part of the problem as well as part of the solution. Just 17% of projects in the global mining industry come in on budget. 17, so 83% don't. And when you unpack what that means, is that 83%, the typical overrun or the typical miscalculation, if you want to call it that, is about between 50 and 60%. So a 4 billion program becomes 6. And it's not just us, it's the mining industry in general. There's many contributing factors to that. So our effective use of capital really needs addressing, the mining sector. So Worley are really leaning in on this now, and we don't seek to gain anything from this, but we want to help solve the problem. So we're looking to work with our competitors and the mining industry in itself to really have a conversation on this challenge that we have. So, and if when you overspend 50 or 60% more than you said you would as a mining group, investors do it once, but they don't do it again. So if we get 150% back to 100% of what we anticipated, we believe as a sector that we'll get this inflow of investment into the industry, which will be a welcome result, actually. So that's what we're doing. But it's also, in terms of the short-term investment, Rob, I don't know. I don't know how we can change that to more patient capital. I think it will come out of better technologies, being more predictable when it comes to assessing the financial investment decision capital, and actually what's commissioned. I think getting that error down I think that will help a lot. But I think that's probably Worley's role in a nutshell. But it's being active in the process, right? It's being a visible part of the solution. That's what's driving us. That's why Worley sponsored me to take as much time as I need in terms of this particular role, because they see it's fundamental to the mining industry.
If we look at global demand versus local impact, with rising global demand for obviously minerals to support the energy transition, how can Worley help balance that demand with the need to protect obviously communities and ecosystems in Brazil?
Yeah, it's a good question. one of the things that I think we can do, and if I could just it's not necessarily just Brazil actually, but it is Brazil, and it's more than that. Worley, we build nickel mines, but we also build battery active material cathode plants. And it takes a lot. There's quite a few processes in between from a mine to a cathode active material facility. And Worley can do each part of that. So we connect the upstream to the downstream. So, I think that's an important role to play, because no one company can do it by itself, but certainly no one country can do it by itself. And what we found, particularly we're a big force in battery active materials. Most projects in the Western world have some sort of Worley input. Sometimes we're the EPCM, sometimes we're doing the feasibility studies and so forth. So it's that connection of countries. It's the connection of the call them silos. The nickel mine to the nickel sulfate to the et cetera, the lithium to the lithium carbonate to the electrolyte, the natural graphite through the process to an anode, the copper right through to a high precision copper foil, aluminium right through to a high precision aluminium foil for the cathode to be pasted on. We can take that process right through into the end. And while we not necessarily, get to do that in one case, we certainly can be that point of information which people can learn from. So I think that's where Worley can really help balance that, breaking some of the silos, some of those misunderstandings of what happens upstream, what happens downstream, because we know about it. We actually build those facilities ourselves, so we can help align is probably a better word for that. I think it's one of our major roles. In terms of protecting local communities and to your questions about the ecosystems in Brazil, I think we have, coming back to the first of a kind technologies that, on that valley of death where you've got wonderful technology that just needs to be commercialized and doesn't make it through. So you'll see us, a really good example is Nano One. It's a cathode active material process which doesn't produce sodium sulfate, but it's a one pot process. You see Worley doing that. There's many others that Worley are heavily involved in. I think it's investing in those is a big thing where we can reduce the impact on the environment. For every ton of cathode in a typical form, you produce 4 tons of sodium sulfate. And it's a saturated market. There's nothing, what do you do with sodium sulfate? You can only make certain amounts of washing powder. So imagine a process that we help facilitate, which doesn't produce sodium sulfate. Imagine if we could invent, the deep eutectics is a classic example, where you could potentially do very safe in situ leaching, which using a biodegradable, non-toxic solvent. That means that you don't have to take rock out anymore and produce tailings. You don't have to do a strip ratio necessarily. There's not 10 tons of waste to 1 ton of ore and then producing, 4% of that is a concentrate, 96% of that's tailings. So imagine if we could do that. That's where Worley's heart is. And in the sense of, our subject matter experts and our incredible metallurgists and chemists, that's where we, a lot of us, when we were interviewed in a survey, the number one thing we wanted to achieve was to leave the world in a better place. It was the legacy bit. And that was a really surprising outcome from this interview process. Yes, salary was important. Yes, benefits were important. But fundamentally, the people of Worley, the response was that they wanted to leave a legacy, a positive legacy for the next generations in this energy transition. So it's something around that. I think, this role of engineering as a core responsibility in society is not often understood. People just get an iPhone, they don't really understand, and it's this perennial conversation we have within ourselves. But it's actually achieving those aims of making sure that mining can be a force for good.
Obviously, your visit highlighted the importance of partnerships between obviously many stakeholders, including obviously governments, investors, companies. What role does Worley play in fostering these collaborations, and what does success look like I suppose, for you and for all the stakeholders?
Another very good question. I think it comes back to the learning and the understanding, the fundamental understanding of we pour concrete. We're not just we can do strategy, we can do environmental impact assessments and stuff like that. The fundamental change in the where financial investment decisions become a project is a result of our men and women around the world actually pouring concrete, lifting beams, or managing contractors that do that for us. So I think it's teaching, it's letting people know who are part of our ecosystem, particularly the investors, about how to do what is happening now, what needs to improve, and how to improve it. I think is being part of that, and also having very open and honest discussions about some of the challenges that we face. It's when you look at mining engineers, which I'm a very proud mining engineer from Kalgoorlie. The society is really not interested in that. It's very difficult to find students for mining and metallurgy and surveying and geology and so forth, because this the mining industry is a very, very close community, and it's very tight, but it doesn't look outward sometimes. It's been a structural problem for us for many, many years. So I think we've got to continue to influence governments, continuing to influence the investors and the mining companies themselves, and bringing the system together in a tight family, if you like, to use a pretty dramatic word, but bringing it all together like that, and teaching people about how it works. So everyone has an understanding of what is up from them and what is down from them. That's at the very least. Success, I think for me is in Worley is really in reducing the environmental impact of mining. A guy called Peter Bryant, who is a well-known mining consultant. He's got a couple of companies that work within the Kellogg's Institute. He did this graph once, and it had on the y-axis it had technology advancement, and on the x-axis it had time. And he plotted three things. One was the aeroplanes, from the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk to an F-22 stealth fighter. He plotted the Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone to the latest iPhone 17 Pro, and then he plotted a rope shovel from the 1800s, digging rock out of an open pit, to the latest Caterpillar rope shovel, which had been released 20 years later. And it was such a stark shift. It was such a stark demonstration of how mining, we've got bigger and better at what we do, but the fundamental processes haven't changed. And I think for me, success looks like reshaping that story. We absolutely have the ability to re-engineer ourselves and do things fundamentally different. I mean, the word paradigm shift is so often used in the wrong way, but there is a fundamental paradigm shift that mining is absolutely capable of. And I think, the thing that inspires me in Worley and why I go to work every day is to make sure that happens. And in the context of coming back to, the original part of the podcast was the Brumadinho disaster. That is the only way we're going to fundamentally engineer these risks out, which are tailings dams, is to redesign the way we work. There's no point in being the world's best at surveying and all that sort of stuff. Imagine if we could engineer them out so they don't exist in the first place. I learned this through my role in Orica Explosives over 13 years. The best thing you can do about a problem is engineer it out. So don't create confined spaces. Don't create this risk. Just engineer it out. And I think for me, to ensure that Brumadinho never, ever happens again, and I'll never, ever meet another relative like I met on Thursday last week, is to fundamentally change the way we engineer. And then when you achieve that, maybe I'll do part of that in my lifetime. But then mining can really be a force for good. It can really be that instrument that can bring prosperity to developing nations, which have ore bodies that the world needs, but they've never been really able to exploit it in that sense and recover the value of it. This is where mining really, really flies, and that's the powerful imperative that we have as a sector, that I think we're right now, thanks to the 130 trillion of assets under management in this global mining initiative called the Mining 2030 Commission, or the Global Investor Commission on Mining, same thing. That's where the investors are pushing this. They're going to support this transition. So, I sense in the next 5 years, we're going to see a fundamental change in the way that mining behaves. The investors are going to get stuck in. You could see it, and it's going to be a very different place. And I think miners are going to be upset, because investors are going to start messing with their space. Not and they'll be highly intelligent. They'll be educated in that space as well. So it's going to be interesting. But ultimately, God willing, we'll be in a better place after all this. I think so. It's a very, very powerful step for the mining industry. And then lastly, when you see President Lula's passion for this, is that the right word? His deep support for the program, where he can see investors which provide the cash to mining industries to grow, actually leaning in and becoming more educated in it. You can see that's why he put his cabinet in front of us. That was a big effort from the president. That meant a lot to him to have us in front of him, and you can see that he's really trying to grip this, and at the very least use Brazil as that article of change for us. So yeah, it's that connection, Rob. It's that connection of investors, governments, companies, supply chains, local communities. That's the role that that Worley's really trying to do in of itself, as well as doing brilliant engineering and project delivery.
Yeah. And lastly, in concluding, and obviously with the work that you do and the visit that you went to Brazil and the experiences obviously that you've just explained, is there anything that you would like to add and obviously share with our audience? And our audience are predominantly people within the mining industry, so they could be mine engineers, they could be geologists, metallurgists, service providers into the industry, graduates, senior people, CEOs of junior miners, CEOs of mid-tiers and bigger companies. Is there anything that you like to sort of finish on, based, like I said, on the work that you do and obviously your recent visit to Brazil?
Often we have a negative view on ourselves. We like remaining in the shadows, so to speak, because people don't understand our industry. And I say this as a person that's all I've ever known. I would bring a sense of optimism and a sense of optimism, maybe even excitement, that the journey, it's the end of the beginning. I think the mining industry stands on the edge of a very important and exciting future. There has never been such an imperative to create critical minerals and metals, whether it's for the energy transition or the development of artificial intelligence and data and stuff like that. This is our moment. We've waited for this for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is our moment that we need to grip. We get one shot. President Bachelet's team, she came to London in 2016 and I organized her program. And one of her team said to me, Darryn, the problem with miners is that you're always the bad guy in the movie. And that was a really stark comment, because when you love the industry and you love this family, this close network of people that we have around the world that many of us share, there is nothing that needs to fundamentally change, and I think that if we grip this with all the technology that we've got at our hands and do things differently, that we can actually be we can recover and be the hero rather than the bad guy in the movie.
Yeah. That's a great note to finish on. Darryn, really appreciate your time, sharing your story, obviously sharing the visit to Brazil, which obviously we can hear and see was a little bit emotional at times, and obviously devastating events that did happen. And hopefully we can learn something from that. And obviously, thank you for sharing that. And hopefully our audience that are listening can take a lot of that on board and change the way that they work, their day-to-day lives and how they work. Because I suppose at the end of the day, we all want to go home safely after a good day's work. So thank you for sharing your story. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they've got any questions, obviously maybe understand a little bit more about the visit, how can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels can they see you on?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn and send me a message through that. That'll be the best thing. I'm always on LinkedIn, learning about what other people are doing. So find me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and I'll get in touch. I look forward to having a conversation.
Yeah, great. Really appreciate your time again, Darryn. Thank you. And hopefully you can come on the podcast next year with maybe another project that you've been involved in.
I'd love to. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the opportunity, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Obviously, it's an episode that needs to be shared. Hopefully, by listening to this, we can improve everyone's day at work and obviously come home safely. So this episode does need to be shared with people that you know in the industry, because we can all learn something from what Darryn's been explaining from a disaster that happened 6 years ago. So appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. And as I said, this is obviously a very important one, and hopefully lessons can be learned. So thank you again. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.